I need to add electrical service for a new pool. Pool builder says we'll need 100 amp service for the pumps and water heat pump. I'm not an electrician, but I am an electrical engineer. I've wired a couple of houses over the years, but I'm not up on the code as it applies to meter connection and sub-panels. I plan to get power from an existing meter that's located approximately 250 from the pool. The meter input power is underground. How do I tell if it's 100 amp or 200 amp service? Or is that just determined by the panel/breaker box? Currently, there's a panel at the meter that has breakers for a 240 volts 5 horsepower pool fountain lights, and a 240 volts, 3 horsepower irrigation pump. Call this the fountain panel. There are 2 unused breaker locations in that panel. The fountain panel does not have a disconnect. The meter will have to be pulled by the power company before work can be done to add another panel, if that's the way to go. This has been a hassle while I'm doing this work. I want to add a disconnect between the meter and the panels or get panels with the disconnect built in. What's the best way to proceed? 1. Use the spare breaker locations in the fountain panel. Is it possible to get a 240 volts 100 amp breaker? I think I'd still need a sub-panel at the pool area with separate breakers for the pumps, heat pumps, lights, etc. 2. Add another panel, or something, that connects to power at the meter and has connections for an underground cable up to the pool area. 3. Discard the existing fountain panel and use something that will have breakers for what's being powered now and more breakers for the sub-panel at the pool. 3. What size cable do I need for running, underground, between the meter/panel pole at the pond and the pool area? Thanks.
Hello and welcome to Just Answer. My name is I will be happy to assist you with your electrical question. 1. How many existing electrical panels does the home have? 1 main panel only or 1 main panel and 1 sub-panel? 2. Look at the main panel breaker and or a main disconnect breaker at the meter can. The breaker will be labeled as either 100 or 200 amp. How many amps? 3. The available service amp quantity to the home is always determined according to the service entrance wire size into the main panel breaker or a meter can main breaker disconnect. For example, a 100 amp service will have 4 AWG copper as a minimum size and a 200 amp service will have 20 AWG copper as a minimum size. 4. What is the full load amps, FLA rating, for the pool pump and the heater pump? Look at the pump nameplate rating. How many volts for each pump? 120 or 240? I assume 240 volts for each. 5. Does the main panel and or the meter can contain a main disconnect breaker? Why do you need a disco between the meter can and the main panel?
Hi Kevin. Sorry it took a day to get back. I've been busy doing irrigation repair. 1. I don't think the number of existing electrical panes the home has isn't really relevant. Getting power from any of the panels would require routing underground cable under concrete and across things like septic lines, power to septic pump, and irrigation lines. There is a second meter at the pond that is currently supplying power to the fountain lights, and an irrigation pump. As I indicated in the first post, there are 2 spare breaker locations in that load center. There is no main disconnect breaker at the meter can. So, my question was how do I tell ? 3, again, there's no main breaker disconnect at the meter that's down by the pond. I'll check the wire gauge from the meter to the fountain panel/load center, but it's likely sized just for the fountain equipment and wouldn't be big enough for an additional 100 or more amps. I'm thinking I would need to replace the meter base with one that has provision for terminating 2 sets of wires. One set would feed the existing fountain panel/load center, and the other one would feed the underground cable to the pool location. Turns out the distance from the meter to the pool location is about 175 feet, not 250 feet. 4. I'll get the FLA rating for the pool and heater pumps. They're sitting in the yard shrink wrapped in plastic. It's nearly dark and supposed to rain tonight, so it will be tomorrow before I can get them. I did find the pool load center in the stack of equipment. It's rated for 150 amps. But, the pool builder told me a 100 amp service is required. So, I've sent him an email asking him if really only 100 amps are required. If so, is it okay to have a service amps less than the load center rating? 5. No, the main panel does not contain a main disconnect breaker. That's why I want one. Thanks. My most immediate question is the size conduit, underground, that would be needed from the meter at the pond to the pool location. Of course, that depends on the maximum total load, which I'm in the process of figuring out. That will determine the wire size, then the conduit will be sized based on that. If only 100 amps are required, I figure number 3 copper would be okay. I think that would mean 1/4 conduit for 3 conductors plus a smaller bare ground wire. But, maybe I'd go with 1/2 to have some margin and easier pulling. Also, I'll see if the load center has temperature ratings on its termination mechanisms. I see wire size required depends on the rating of the load center termination in addition to the wire temp rating.
Hello Dave, and thank you for the replies. 1. The National Electrical Code recommends that the voltage drop be 3% or less for feeder and /branch circuits. Based on a 100 amp double pole feeder circuit at 240 volts and using a 175 foot run, results in 2 AWG copper for the 2 hots, 1 neutral. 1/6 AWG copper can be used for the equipment grounding conductor. This results in a voltage drop of 2.8% or a loss of 6.6 volts. Therefore, these conductors are code compliant. Using a 100 amp rated sub-panel is based on the assumption that the combined FLA motor, heater wattage and other branch circuit ratings do not exceed 100 amps. All sub-panel circuits are required to be a 4-wire circuit. Since the feeder circuit will be underground, the conductors must be insulated rated type THWN. 2. The load center amp rating means that the service amps or feeder amps cannot exceed the load center rating. 3. Minimum conduit diameter would be 1 1/4 inch spool. 40 or spool. 80 gray electrical PVC. Yes, I agree, increase the conduit size to the next trade size using 1.5 inch PVC to make the wire pull easier. Any PVC conduit above ground must be spool. 80 due to it having a thicker wall than spool. 40. Minimal burial depth for the conduit is 18 inches below final grade. I also recommend to install a warning ribbon tape approximately 6 inches below final grade along the entire conduit run. The ribbon tape will provide a warning to anybody digging that an electrical line exists below. 4. At the meter, I recommend installing a combination meter can along with a built-in 100 amp main breaker to act as the means of disconnect. The 100 amp load center also needs to be a 100 amp main breaker type and not a main lug type. If the subpanel will not be protected, it needs to be a NEMA Type 3 or rated for wet and weather conditions. 5. At the subpanel, you will also require a quantity of 2 8-foot ground rods spaced a minimum of 6 feet apart. Install 1 contiguous 8 AWG copper grounding electrode conductor from the 2 ground rods to a separate equipment ground bar on the subpanel. No splices allowed for the ground rod conductor. 6. Since a subpanel, do not install the green main bonding screw or a main bonding jumper strap. On all subpanels, the neutral must always be isolated from the ground and the panel metal enclosure. By not installing the main bonding jumper, this is how the subpanel has an isolated neutral. You will also need to purchase a separate equipment ground bar to be installed in the subpanel. At any subpanel, only bare copper or green insulated ground wires will land on the equipment ground bar, never any white neutrals. Do not intermix neutrals and grounds on a subpanel neutral bus bar, as only white neutrals land on the main neutral bus bar in any subpanel. 7. GFCI protection is required for the pool pump motor, pool heater, any underwater lighting niche and any 120-volt convenience receptacles. Hope this helps. If you have any additional questions, let me know and I'll be glad to answer them for you. Otherwise, don't forget to rate me before you log off. The next time you have an electrical question, you can also request for me at http://www.justanswer.com/home-improvement/expert your electrician. Thanks. Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin. I might touch base with you again once I get the actual FLA of all the equipment.
No problem, Dave. Glad to assist. If you have any additional questions, let me know and I'll be glad to answer them for you. Otherwise, don't forget to rate me before you log off. Thanks. Kevin.
FAR, I found 2 Pantera 011018 water pumps that have FLA of 16 amps. Sometime in the future, I may want to add a Pentair heat pump for the pool water. All models seem to have 60 Florida. My wife would like a convenience outlet for a small refrigerator. That would be 15 amps, I think. So, that's 107 amps. There are LED pool lights and maybe some electrical power required for the propane gas heater, not sure yet. So, I may end up needing 150 amp service. If so, I figure I need number 10. Do you agree? Would this work? http://www.wironcabletogo.com/104cthhn PVC tray cable with ground.html. GCLID equals CJ0 Kekchoik BBRCP4 Simzerms Bekatok 8 PNB KMK underscore P7 cos of XD3C408 Ka Slug 7U5 WBW5 underscore Ga Aki 8P8 Hawk. What size conduit would I need for that? Is it better to have separate wires or quad wire?
Hello Dave. 1. Not sure if your FLA rating of 60 amps was a typo or not. A 60 amp FLA rating on a 240 volt pump equates to a 11 horsepower motor, which is a large pump motor. 2. NEC requires the FLA rating to be multiplied by 250% or 2.5 times the FLA rating to account for the inrush current. Thus, a 60 amp FLA x 2.5 results in 150 amps just for the pump motor. 3. If using a 150 amp panel, yes, 10 AWG copper conductors will result in a voltage drop of 2.6% or a loss of 6.2 volts, which is code compliant. 4. The cable that you referenced is not code compliant for outdoors since the insulation is only rated as type THHN. Outdoor and/or underground copper conductors must be rated as type THWN. The W stands for wet conditions. 5. Personally, I prefer to install 4 individual conductors in an underground conduit system. If one conductor becomes damaged, you can always pull it out of the conduit and install a replacement conductor. Can't do that with a cable assembly, as the entire cable would need to be replaced if damage ever occurred. Thank you for the excellent service rating as well as the bonus. Much appreciated. If you have any other questions, just let me know. Take care and have a great Labor Day weekend. Thanks again. Kevin.
1. It's not a pool pump, a heat pump. To heat the pool water. But 60 amps was incorrect. I was reading the wrong column, HC, in the attached table, heatpumps.png. So, according to that table, the breaker size will be 40 or 50 amps. But, you have me thinking about the 011018 pumps. That was a FLA rating, not breaker size. So, I'll have to dig a bit more on that. But, higher-end pumps have a soft start capability. It's not like throwing the full 230 volts across a motor with 0 RPM. So, I would think the code would have to account for variable speed pump like the Pentair's ?4. I read that most THHN cable is dual rated for THWN, but at a lower temp. The text at the URL I sent says, rated at 90 degrees Celsius dry, 75 degrees Celsius wet. Does that mean THWN? Not that I will ignore your recommendation to use individual wires versus quad. It's just that I see that rated 90C dry, 75 wet for many, if not most wire that's for sale. Thanks.
Okay, if the heat pump breaker size will be either a 40 or 50 amp, then you're in good shape there. Yes, many conductors are often dual rated as both THHN and THWN. I always go by what's labeled on the exterior insulation of the conductor. Specs can always contain a mistake in them. If the conductor is labeled as both THHN and THWN, then that is certainly code compliant.
If you have a home improvement or appliance question and want to chat with an expert now, visit JustAnswer.com/YTHI.